Okay, so for those of you who are just tuning in, this is my second response to Sisyphus Redeem's upload concerning people's belief on when life begins. And I will link his original upload as well as my previous response, and I encourage you to watch each before viewing the content that I discuss here. Now, Mr. Redeemed, at the end of your video you summarize your second argument when you say that if I believe a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body is more important than 1/5,000,000th of a child's life, it follows that I do not believe that life begins at conception. Now, I think that anyone who listens to this statement will already know that the conclusion does not necessarily follow the premise. Indeed, the conclusion does not probably follow the premise because the conclusion is not related to the premise. But that's the third checkpoint, and I want to start with my first checkpoint and then, or not my, but the first checkpoint, and then work up towards the third checkpoint. So in terms of the first checkpoint, your argument has many glaring errors, and the most obvious of these is the misuse of the word life. Life is a very simple biological process which can be, and has been, demonstrated and proven empirically as a matter of undeniable scientific fact to begin at conception. This does not mean that we have a person at conception as you insinuate in your video. We do have a completely independent, unique, individual human specimen that is alive. But that does not make it a person. And mind you, when I say individual and independent, I don't mean that it doesn't need its mother for survival, or that it is an individual in the same sense that you or I are individuals, in the sense that it has idiosyncrasies and a personality and thought processes to set it apart from everyone around it. I don't mean it in that sense. I mean it in the sense that independently, looked at all by itself, this is a living human organism, a living member of the human species. It is an individual human specimen, an individual living human specimen, regardless of what its mother is, and regardless of where it is located. A zygote is a living human specimen, all on its own, independently, individually. It is an individual, independent, living human specimen. But this does not make it a person, because it doesn't have that independence that you and I have. It doesn't have that individuality that defines a person. It doesn't have a personality. So I think what you did in your video was you used life when you meant to say person or personhood. And so I think that I can overlook this glaring error that prevents your argument from passing the first checkpoint if I simply imagine that you said person or personhood instead of life, or I place person or personhood over the word life. So it becomes a child's person or a child's personhood instead of a child's life. But even if we overlook this first glaring error, there are 2 or 3 other glaring errors within your argument, and I don't even have to move into the conclusion. I can focus on the first checkpoint and the premise of your argument. A woman's right to do what she wants with her own body can be broken down into 2 ambiguous terms: her own body and a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body. These are 2 separate terms. A fetus is not a part of a woman's body any more than a pinworm living in your sphincter is a part of your body. At all. It is not. It is a unique human specimen that happens to be using her body to sustain itself. So her right to do what she wants with her own body does not encompass the fetus, to do whatever she wants to the fetus. It does, however, encompass her right to refuse to provide support for parasites that want to live off of her body, debatably. That's where the second part of this term's ambiguity comes into play. What does a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body encompass? And this seems like a pretty straightforward statement, a pretty straightforward term that you shouldn't have to define, that I should just understand. But when you think about it, it's actually pretty ambiguous, and it is inappropriate to have an ambiguous term, a term that is not properly defined, that is also crucial to the premise of your argument. For example, does a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body encompass all parts of her body, or only parts of her body that are immediately attached to her person? For example, if somebody were to discard a used condom in your yard, would they have rights over that semen? Or would you have rights over that semen because it's in your yard, it's on your property? Would it be a violation of their right to do what they want with their own body for you to refuse to allow them to come into your yard and steal their semen back? I don't know. Would Van Gogh have the right to demand that his finger be returned to him after he handed out handed it out as a gift, and would refusing to do so be a violation of his right to do what he wants with his own body? I don't know. But in order for me to see if you are employing your term properly, I need to know. I need to know the definition of the term to see if it is being properly employed. So on a second note, your argument fails the first checkpoint. Moving on to a third note, still within the first checkpoint, what is 1/5 millionth of a child's life? How do you fraction out a biological process as though it were a mathematical value? This would be like asking me about a pint of a child's life. I don't know what a pint of a child's life is, and so for me to know if you are properly using the term, and for me to know how I feel about that thing in question, I need to know what the thing itself is. I cannot tell you how much I value a fraction of a child's life until I know what that fraction of a child's life is. So there are several points within the first checkpoint wherein your argument is flawed. But if we move on to the second checkpoint, I don't think that I can really address your argument until it passes the first. I cannot tell you if your premise is valid, that I think a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body is more important than 1/5 millionth of a child's life is, until I know what these terms mean. And I don't know because you never provided a working definition and because they are ambiguous terms. So until you pass the first checkpoint, it is impossible for you to pass the second checkpoint. But if I overlook this and address your argument in terms of the third checkpoint, all of this is irrelevant because you can't pass the third checkpoint since your conclusion and your premise have nothing to do with one another. The argument that because I value a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body more than a certain fraction of a child's life, that I do not believe a child's life begins at conception, is the equivalent of saying that because I value the American tradition of baseball more than the Spanish tradition of torturing animals for entertainment, that I do not believe that the Spearing the Bull event will begin at 5 o'clock on Monday. But however heinous I feel the Spearing the Bull event is, I can look at the schedule and say, okay, well this begins at 5. And the fact that I value something else more than that event, or that I have no value for that event because it's not a part of my culture, has nothing to do with whether or not I believe it begins at point A or point B, and it does not mean that because I value this more than that I believe it begins at a specific point, or that it does not begin at a specific point. These two things do not reflect upon one another in any way, shape, or form. So the conclusion does not necessarily follow your premise, it does not probably follow your premise, and your argument is therefore weak, invalid, and just a bad argument at all three checkpoints. Thank you for listening to my response, and I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I look forward to any rebuttal you may want to offer.